So let's say Hong Kong, you would have 28,000. So it still beats 1,200, right? So you could say it could technically a bit more more democratic than Hong Kong today, right? Technically, so about 0.4% of the population. It's called 自议局. So you can call it local congress. And local congress, the government or the Qing central government was hoping to use these guys to go against local governors, right? So actually they fought, and then the local governors realized there's no point fighting, so they started to collude. So that's also one of the main reasons why there was such a why the Qing government actually fell apart so quickly. So all the local congress then got together, and from 1910 to 1911, they went to Beijing 5 times, all of them, to ask for constitution to be brought earlier than the original 1917. And so they also created the National Congress, and this is quite interesting. How the National Congress does is this: let's say Hunan has a quota of 10 members. Let's say. Locally, you decide, or within the members of your local congress, you decide, let's say 20. Then the governor would cross out 10. So if Beijing can use it today with Hong Kong, right? So let's say Hong Kong has universal suffrage. You have, let's say, 3 candidates that you have voted, and then China chooses one. That also, so reverse kind of selection also works, right? So that's what happened for the National Congress. But main thing is the whole local level, provincial level Congress, the major thing is then everybody who was anybody was then grouped together with one voice. So that's one big thing. And the voice went exactly the same, which is we want constitutional reform ASAP. Okay? So by 1911, there was. And right before they talked about new policy, there was one of the biggest revolutionary attempts that happened in April of 1911. It's called Huanghuagang. So actually, if you go to Guangzhou, there's still a site where it was a bunch of Huangxing, along with a bunch of Chinese students who studied in Japan, along with a bunch of triads and a bunch of new army. Tried to take over the government house in Guangzhou. Supposedly, there was supposed to be 10 different armies, but then it turned out that 6 didn't show up. There were 4, and of the 4, 3 didn't fight, so there was only 1. And so obviously they were put down very quickly. And then 86 people were arrested. They were killed. So there were 72 corpses. They put it into the place called Huanghuagang, where they were buried. And so they're called the Huanghuagang, 72 martyrs. So that was the last of the revolutions attempted by Sun Yat-sen. And because of that, actually, they're actually very down at the time. They're thinking revolution will not happen. This is about 6 months before the actual revolution. But revolution won't happen. We'll think of a new way. Then in early May, there was they created the cabinet. So the constitution will come in 3 years. So 1915. Okay, in 1915, so early by 2 years. And then there's a cabinet. And so when all the local gentlemen in the Congress heard about the 3 years, they were furious. They was like, no, we came to see you 3 or 5 times. We want it now. We don't want it in 3 years. And so Liang Qichai also said, because in 1915, 3 years, so 1913, sorry. It's the 5th year of Xuantong, which is the year name for Puyi. It was like, Xuantong, the 5th year of Xuantong will never come. It's as if it will never come. And he was right, because it never came, right? So, 09, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, Xuantong 5年. So in 1913, the year of Xuantong, 5th year, will never come. And so the furious, and what made them even more furious was the new cabinet. The new cabinet is supposed to be more democratic, but what happened was of the 13 members, 9 were Manchurian. 7 of them were in the imperial family. And the constitution was basically a more conservative version of the Japanese constitution, where it was where 70% of the document was talking about how the Qing Dynasty should rule forever. Right, so it goes against any kind of democratic system. And so they were furious. And then the next day happened was the railroad, the nationalization of the railroad process. because back then, China had to pay so much for the reparations, right? And so when they had to pay so much for reparations, they needed to borrow money. But then but when you borrow money, especially in foreign currency, you need collateral. The best kind of collateral is railroads. So they tried to get, the central government tried to get, Xinhai tried to get as many railroads together to be collateralized for borrowing from the international banking community. But the issue is, for a few years back, when Guangxu was still alive, the final modernization period is all about industrialization on a local level. So each province actually had their own railroad companies to build their own railroads. And so they talked about building 1,710 kilometers of railroads. Obviously, after like a few years, without any direction, there were only 44 kilometers built, right? The best province that built, it was all in southern province, were Zhejiang and Guangdong. No surprise. Hunan, Hubei, pretty good. Okay. The worst was Sichuan. Sichuan was by far the worst, because they want to build a railroad from Wuhan to Sichuan, to Chengdu, which it made absolutely no sense because the Yangtze River was right next to it. So you don't need, and shipping is always easier, right? And another thing is, the shareholding was very interesting, especially in Sichuan, where a lot of the local farmers actually, it's called zugu, which is the shareholding from rent, as in when they give the rent, it went into the shares as shares of the railroad companies. Okay, and then so when the government wanted to nationalize all these companies, they said, I'll pay you fair value, but I won't compensate if you made a loss. So it's kind of fair.